So at this time, we will be asking Robert Passikoff to come forward. So,
Hey,
so welcome, welcome. We're very happy to have you with us today, especially to talk about this role of emotion. This session is very heavy up. This entire webinar is very heavy up on technology that is, AI technology, which often is cited as not being as emotionally evocative, if you will, in standard. But research, our own research within MASB has shown the importance of that. And I know that you have some compelling data to share with us and some case studies on this matter. So I just like to hand that over to you and let you run with it.
well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Uh, when Frank and I talked about doing this, what we were talking about was emotion as a way of being able to not only predict behavior, but also tie back to marketing investment and real ROI, which is something that we've done for a long time. I We've done something with some AI metrics as well that I'll measure that I'll mention, Frank, as we go through. Um, so if you can start, this is just a little background about us. We specialize in emotional brand engagement and consumer loyalty. Those things tie to behavior for us. We've been kind of looking for connections to metrics that show real ROI. And what we found is that we have very, very high correlations in terms of consumer behavior toward a brand, positive behavior toward a brand. Usually it's noted correlations of like 0.77 plus. What we discovered was that we needed to be able to understand emotions better. And so the methodology is a combination of psychology and some really neat higher order statistical analysis that allows us to understand how people are actually going to look at a category, compare brands, and ultimately behave well toward the brand. Um, we've adapted it for measurements for marketing communications and such, to be able to do again in advance of spend to be able to optimize what marketing is able to do. I think if you go to the next slide, these are just some of we've worked in virtually every category one could think. Um, I want to just comment, not on the slide. We did work for many years with the National Football League. Brand Keys had annually for over 20 years done something called the Sports Loyalty Index that looked at the four major leagues and all the teams in the league. And I hope I'm not stepping on Ray's presentation. We worked with Ray at the NFL, and what we found was that there were very high correlations with team loyalty and two aspects that ultimately contribute in terms of marketing. One was TV viewership numbers, and the other was purchase of licensed merchandise. So, it's nice to see that loyalty is paying out, even in terms of sports. All right, so we needed some yardstick, some criterion to be able to use. And what we found was that the consumer's, emotional and rational view of the category was going to be the best possible way of understanding what they really wanted. Thing is that it came down to expectations. I mean, the higher that the mountain range got, it was an indicator. It became a consumer indicator of what people really expected. And I say really expected, you see, I'm going to give you some some methodology because the aspect of understanding how emotions came into play, is something that has shifted, over, since reasonably, 1965 and such to end up where we are now. So, what we're looking at ultimately is a perception of the consumer's ideal that gives us a measure of how high up really is. I always feel like this quote, which has been around forever, is became kind of the foundation of what we did. Uh, David Ogilvy said, "Consumer doesn't behave like he says, he doesn't say what he thinks, and he does not think what he feels." And that's gotten more and more true as consumers had access to more and more information. uh, they talk to themselves before they talk to the brands. Um, and so the issue was always, are we really going to understand what these people really think? And that's become more difficult because emotion has become a more important aspect of what we need to be able to measure. These are the technical specifications. I'm more than willing to, if you have any questions offline, more than willing to take you through this. What we've what we've done is we look at emotionally derived evaluations. It's based on established psychological theory. I wish to God I could tell you I had invented it, but it's out there in the textbooks. Um, we we fuse rational and emotional values together via factor regression and causal path analyses, and it allows us to understand exactly how people are viewing a category, how they're going to compare the options within a category, and ultimately how they're going to buy because it correlates so very highly to this positive behavior and the metrics that we can find in terms of things in retail like same store sales, as we saw in our fashion loyalty index that we conducted. Um, we say 100% respondent driven, high test retest reliability off national probability samples in the US and the UK. And we recalibrate every 5 years because consumers change and we want to make sure that we're able to measure what's really going on. Um, as I said, we've done it in virtually any category you'd care to name, and have done applications for B2C and B2B and D2C. We've used it in 35, 36 countries around the world, and we have independent validations that, again, that show the correlation with in-market consumer behavior and ultimately sales. This was just a diagram showing what we do. Um, it's a Jungian typology that we use on the emotional to measure the emotional side, which also gives us the ability to be able to the ability to be able to actually measure expectations unconstrained by reality, and then the ability to be able to rationally look at attributes, benefits, and values that are important in the category. In fact, we added in AI as a value that we look at across all of the categories in our index because we, of course, have also recognized the import and effect that it's having to be able to see where it is having its greatest effects. And again, these things get fused via the statistical analysis. A good researcher gives attribution. Lisa Berry, who probably many of you may know, but was the model for the statistician in Mad Men. She was the one that helped us create the model that allows us to be able to see the output that we get. Validations have been done. The Advertising Research Foundation had done a first opinion review, which I always liken to another brand. I borrow from another brand, the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. We do what we say we're going to do. 24/7 Wall Street had run a financial equity analysis against, at the time, 500 and so brands. We've got about twice that now. Um, and they identified 11 brands that we had assessed at best meeting expectations. And of those 11, 10 of the brands were the leader in the category. Aquiton Capital Advisors had done an equity analysis and did looked at our metrics for and brand values and did their correlations range from 0.83 to 0.901 to be able to predict the impact of future purchases. And it also shows that we can work cross-category. Um, the data that I'm going to share with you today are from our Customer Loyalty Engagement Index. We've been doing it annually for 28 years. You're looking at 4.6 million customer evaluations, 1,600 some brands across 145 categories.
And we did have a quick question, Jerry.
Sure.
We have, or I'm sorry, for Robert, we have from Jerry Nichols. They're asking, is this an always on panel survey?
No, we do it. It is not. We do it January of every year. And I have we because we know that things move faster than 1 point will do. We do a loyalty leaders assessment in September of each year, which allows us to be able to see whether or not there are shifts in terms of category drivers or expectations. But the information that I'm presenting you today is information that was collected in January of this year. So we've looked at, if you go back to 2006, we see that the decision process has become more emotional than rational. I'm going to show you some earlier data in a minute, but it was 60%. This is cross category, 60% emotional versus 40% rational versus this year's data, again, cross category, across 1,400 some brands, 71% emotional versus 29% rational. Again, not terribly, people kind of go, well, yeah, okay, why do we see this shift? Well, if you go to the next slide, you'll see what has happened over time. I mean, this is the issue. By the way, I want to say I'm more optimistic about brands than the gentleman that had the killer robot and Joanna's comment, because the rational side of stuff has become table stakes. I mean, consumers are not just looking for, you go, oh, I'm looking for the best. Well, they're looking for the thing that best meets their expectations, which unconstrained by reality move a hell of a lot faster than brands are able to move. But the fact is that emotions are primarily driving what how people are going to behave in the marketplace. Now, not ignoring primacy of product. Clearly you can't have a laundry detergent that you use that destroys your clothing. I mean, there are certain basic levels that things have to meet, but ultimately, from the rational perspective, process reengineering and all the ISO stuff, everything that we've done, it gets real hard to find differentiation on the basis on a brand to brand basis, um, that is shockingly different. I mean, I was thinking about this last night. Even, there was a time when if you had a phone that was the size of a shoebox, you were thrilled. Now what we've got is differentiation. Differentiation on a phone tends to come down to how many camera lenses does it have, or does it fold? I mean, it gets tougher to be able to do it. And the brand engagement, the emotional brand engagement that can be created is what's going to happen. And FYI, I pass this along to anyone that would like to reach out. My email's at the back. We did a loyalty study about AI brands, six AI brands, 2,000 some folks. And when we look at what drives, again, our kind of definitions in terms of the values that people are putting together. For AI, it was 68% emotional versus 32% rational. So it's not too far off in terms of how emotion has taken over, in terms of how people are behaving positively toward brands. And then ultimately, I guess, the axiomatic, if they behave positively, you're going to make more money and you ought to, be able to show more ROI for your marketing bucks. What doesn't, well, this is what doesn't work, particularly emotions, net promoter scores, smiley scales don't do it. The Cantrell ladder won't do it for you. What we find, if go to the next one, what does work for us is expectations. Those are the best measures in terms of emotional engagement. And those the expectations are going to be different category to category. So unfortunately, you can't go, okay, here's your 10-point scale. Let's just rate things. That won't work. You need to look at it by category. And uh, again, my knowledge base, my experience, and my opinion is that the brand is going to be the thing that people are going to be able to engage with. That the brand on an emotional basis, standing for whatever it's able to stand for, is the thing that people are going to be able to link to. And just as an FYI, we did see some differences in terms of how various users of various AI brands see things differently, in terms of it doesn't appear to be all the same. Now, in fairness, we did this the end of last year, and now it's 6 months later, and things could have shifted anyway. But we are able to take a look and see what those things are. This is just a piece of output. We always talk about four dimensions. The What we're able to see is the how people view a category. What's the order of the drivers? It's a four-factor model that accounts for about 96% of the variance. Again, shifts, I think you've got what we got here? We got, I think this was for cosmetics, is what we threw in as an example. But what it shows us is the order of the drivers, one, two, three, four. We're able to identify the percent contribution that each driver makes to engagement and loyalty. And then the index, so because the drivers are essentially different from one another, although you need all four in order to be able to understand the category, we indexed the level of expectation so we could compare them. And this ended up the first most important driver was the highest level of expectation, but that's not always the case. Um, Oftentimes, we find that things that are related to more rational aspects, like pricing and things like that, end up being third or fourth most important in terms of their contribution. And yet they oftentimes will have a high expectation because people have learned over time and apps have taught us, and suppose AI is directing us these days that there's always a cheaper way to buy something out there these days. But the aspect that I wanted to enforce is that each of these drivers can be opened up, and what we are able to see inside are the attributes, benefits, and values that form the components of those drivers. And we also are able to see what the percent contribution of those individual components are, which allows us to be able to make strategic decisions about how people are looking at the ideal, how they're looking at the brand, what aspects of the category and the values within the category and the emotional values in the category are going to be most effective in terms of creating, marketing success. I mean, that's ultimately, I don't need to say to this audience, but I do say to college lectures that I give, it's a business, it's not a hobby. I mean, so we can talk all we want about the creative and what we didn't like and didn't like, but the point is that what you're looking to create are sales. Okay, if we go to the next one. Okay. The difficulty is that expectations move at what we call the speed of the consumer. And usually, well, no, always faster than brands are able to keep up. I mean, part of it is, I think, that expectations, because they are more difficult to accurately measure, they get kind of sloughed off. I mean, I know everyone out there has at one point or time gotten a text or an email that something that you've done, and it goes, "Have we met your expectations?" And the issue is that if you're purely rational, the answer is always going to be 99% of the time is going to be sure you have, because of all of the work that's been done over the past 30 years in terms of all the process reengineering and the ISO and the satisfaction and everything else that's gone on, because most of that stuff is the same. But my question is always, really, do you actually know what I expect? And if all you're looking at is the rational stuff, you're in a lot of trouble because you're not going to find that. You're not going to find what you need. And most brands don't. Expectations increased 29% year over year. That's about right. It's always been in the mid to high 20s. On average, there really is nothing. On average, brands keep up with those expectations by about 8%. Yeah, I mean, the range is any place from 7% to 11% in terms of individual categories. But that leaves an awfully big gap between what people really expect and what they see your brand delivering. And this is what we, this is kind of the overview about expectations, engagement, loyalty. And when I say brand success, I mean, I'm going to jump to the bottom, sales and profits. I don't care about awareness. Everyone is aware of everything these days, you know? And again, on the issue of recommendations and the issues of the 10-point scales, uh, since nothing is since because consumers have such control over things. You said you don't have a second chance to make a first impression. People move on. Um, the loyalty as a concept have changed from what it was, in the 60s of I only drink Coke, I don't drink Pepsi, I won't try anything else. I mean, during the um, during the COVID pandemic, um, people tried a lot of new stuff. They tried a lot of new stuff because the things that they wanted weren't on the shelves. And that's okay. But as soon as the brand that they did prefer, the brand that they were loyal to, the brand that did better meet their expectation and showed back up, they went back to it. So what we know is that a brand that is better able to meet these expectations is the one that is always going to do better. And so I like this. We called this when it happened the Zappification of America. I mean, it's the thing about expectations. I There was a time when everyone paid to have everything delivered, and you expected it. Also, that at that same time, if you didn't like something, you paid to have it returned. Then people said, we'll pay for the delivery, but you pay for the return. And then these guys said, you know what? We'll pay for the delivery and we'll pay for the return, and we don't care how many shoes you order. And if you take a look at the expectation levels for what it was back in 1985, and then look at where it's moved today. The difference for expectations went up. And in 2008, Zappos revenue went from 1.6 million to 1 billion. Hadn't changed the product mix. What they were better doing was meeting expectations regarding convenience. They also happen to be really smart about behavior in that if a woman ordered two pair of shoes and she would return one, but if she ordered six pair of shoes, she'd keep three. But that showed up in terms of the actual bottom line. So what I did, because I just thought, well, all right, let's show how this works within the financial sector. I looked at it generally, and then we pulled some data from the online banking category. And well, this is a change. We've shown that since 1996, there's been, and this is a net change of 40% in terms of expectations, what consumers expect from their ideal generally. And as in this case, brands were able to keep up by 10%. Again, that 30% gap offers an opportunity for someone to come in and say, if I had a better understanding of what they really wanted in terms of expectation, I could deliver that, my brand could deliver that, and I would see more better behavior. So uh, we see generally that there have been the shifts. And I'm going to just show you some slides that bear that out. The brokerage was expectations were a little lower than the overall financial category at 36%. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. Um, so we could said desire versus delivery, and this is the entire financial sector. The light green is showing what they expected, and the dark green is where all the brands were in terms of evaluations regarding their ability to meet those expectations. Now, again, from a strategic perspective, I mean the brands that we look at, you know, most of them to one, relatively one degree to another, they're all successful brands. But from a marketing perspective, we believe that if you could fill that gap between where they see you delivering versus what they actually desire, we see that you do much better. And this was I have data on the online brokerage. Again, they were a little lower than the overall financial sector. I think they were at 36% in growth in terms of expectation versus 11%, I think, in terms of, again, overall, the overall brands that we look at. I think there are 12 or 14 brands in the category. Again, a very big gap between what people expect and what they see being delivered. And these are all consumers, consumers evaluating the brands that they use. So there you go. I mean, they stick with them, but well, they've stuck with them at least as in terms of how this evaluation has gone. Okay, so here is the ideal. The four drivers, and I didn't do the percent contributions for each, but it totals 100. And you see that confidence and trust has the highest level of expectation. And again, staring at it, it doesn't always work out this way, but they're the levels of expectation. And if you want, you compare, I'll go to the next slide. What we're able to do is we're able to take the sample brand that I took and say, okay, how well does the brand meet these expectations? Now, let me be clear on something. When we do these analyses, we always recommend, well, no, we always insist that it's the brand that we're evaluating in some competitive brand because those are going to be relative. Because right now, it looks like this brand is not doing terribly well against the ideal, which we know are higher levels of expectation, higher growth in terms of expectation than brands keep up. But if we look at the category, we just done a category average for you. You see that no, I guess versus the average on confidence and trust, the test brand that we included, and again, these are real numbers, is doing a lot better than the category generally. But in terms of confidence and trust, I picked that as the first. There's a big gap between what they see, what their own customers see them delivering versus what they would expect. I should have said at the very beginning, we've geared this statistically so that for percent contributions and for indices, you're looking at plus or minus 5 for significance at the 95% confidence level. So there's not a real significant difference on frictionless customer experience. Uh, I don't know that that's where I would go and look, but it allows you to look at this from a strategic perspective. And again, this is just our gap analysis from a strategic perspective says, where do you want to look? But again, you would have done a SWOT analysis against competitive brands or a critical competitor to be able to make the decision as to where strategically am I going to invest marketing dollars, and then again going back to what I showed at the beginning, you're able to open up each driver and see what values, what attributes, what benefits might be the ones to try and leverage from a marketing and creative perspective. And again, brands that meet expectations for the ideal always do better in the marketplace. So always, not sometimes, always do better in the marketplace. Um, what I did was, this is simple math. I just converted the ability of the brands to meet expectations to a brand strength percentage. It's just I took the overall weighted expectation index and did it over the ideal, and you see what we did. It's simple math. So we could just look at it from a percentage. People seem more comfortable with that. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this was for online brokerage, and the data that you're looking at on the left is from last year's January Customer Loyalty Engagement Index. And so this is what we would have called from a brand strength in terms of their ability to meet expectations. This is how these brands that we looked at um, ranked. And then what we did was, it's not from the CLEI on the right, it is from the published data in the Wall Street Journal, but it is from January of this year, a year later, that they issued the number of accounts. And I picked that to kind of keep it simple. I'll show you some other correlations, but it's a 0.92 correlation between what we had as brand strength and what we see as the number of accounts in terms of you you want more customers, you're going to make more profits, your marketing is going to be more successful. We looked at the other categories where we some of the data we've got in terms of share of market, some of the data we've got in terms of same store sales, in terms of profitability where posted, uh, share market, increased sales over time. And I just picked these six categories from this year's from this year's Customer Loyalty Engagement Index to be able to show what the correlation looked like um, between the brand's abilities to meet expectations and financial success within the categories, which is pretty good. And so this is just decision making is more emotional. Expectations are probably the best way to do it, not the easiest way to measure them, but it's able to do it, and that they correlate extraordinarily highly with positive consumer behavior, sales, profitability, all of the positive things that you are looking at in terms of the marketplace. And I think we open that to Q&A.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, we have quite a few already lined up here. I'm going to take two by Jerry Nichols combined. He's asking some basic ideas about the data itself. One is in the reports, what are the key markets and also what kind of sample sizes do you typically have? And then he also asks, is it published annually? So is there an annual report that people can acquire?
Okay. Um, it's a US sample. It is we it's this year it was some 80,000 interviews in order to be able to accommodate 1,400 brands and 119 categories, I think. Um, we amortize the people qualify for category usage, and then they have to qualify for brand usage, and depending on the category, there are set definitions for, how many times you had to have rented a car, or what was the last cell phone you bought, or so forth, things like that. So we are talking to actual customers. It's men and women 18 to 65 years of age, drawn from the 9 U.S. Census regions. And there is not there we do a an annual posting of the 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 brands that are number one in their specific category annually, and that is on our site under the Customer Loyalty Engagement Index.
Great. Well, Ray Katz has raised his hand, but since he's going to be our next panelist, I just elevated him to panelist early. So, Ray, go ahead and
Hey, Ray.
Hey, how you doing, Dr. Passikoff? First of all,
I I'm
amazing,
good.
amazing stuff as always. I've been following your brand keys work and brand work for 40 years. Seemed to me that the really some of the minimal remaining variance in the online brokerage was just the age of the brands.
Yeah, absolutely might have been. I again, we do have a client in that category. Um, it, I was looking for something financial, and I thought that that was going to be interesting.
Awesome, great stuff.
okay, great. Robert, I have a question on my own I'd like to ask, if I may.
Sure.
Which is that have you ever looked at the marketing strategies which the companies are employing, and then what their mix of which of the elements, which of the keys they're actually hitting upon or succeeding at, and how those overlap? In other words, can you tell us if the marketers who are trying to market to specific, drivers, if they're actually being successful or not?
Yeah,
Does that come through?
the answer is yes. I mean, once you've got a benchmark measure of uh, the ideal is terrific to have, to be able to base strategy and your marketing efforts against. Once you've got an actual measure of the brand, you are able to see whether or not there are effects to different they when they execute different programs. You're able to see whether or not there are real effects to them. I mean, that goes to the issue about we say, I mean, again, borrowing from experts before, you don't really want to know what people say they think. You want to know what they really think. And that's the difficulty in terms of, I mean, earlier it's gotten things have gotten a lot more sophisticated, but we're still looking at it from an emotional and psychological perspective. You know, you you have moved into a lot of areas. I'm thinking just the Super Bowl advertising stuff. A lot of that stuff has just become entertainment. It hasn't become engagement. It isn't delivering against the drivers that it needs to deliver against. And forgetting the fact that, okay, this is, it's a stage to be able to just do whatever the hell you want to do. And sometimes just a reward for the agency to be able to show how creative they can be. Um, on a regular basis for regular marketing, you really do want to see some filling in of those gaps. You want to be able to see that people not just reporting back rationally, oh, the ad said this, but whether or not they actually believed it. And do they have a level of trust in terms of what you're trying to say? And that's why measuring this on an emotional basis rather than just on a, on a scalar basis allows you to be able to see what the emotional effects are in terms of advertising.
Yes, and I was also wondering, on the path side of it, you mentioned awareness, and in many categories, awareness is ubiquitous among some of the major brands. But I wonder, is there, which way does that cycle go? If you meet expectations, will that grow your top of mind awareness? On that side, or does the awareness drive that you're in the consideration set and they even have expectations for you? How does that work in the consumer's mind?
Well, part of that is a shift in terms of what loyalty really looks like. I mean, today versus 20 years ago. I mean, what we see is that the better a brand meets expectations, we have higher levels of recognition and engagement and consideration. I mean, we've looked at that. Um, the 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 difficulty is that at one point in time, and I guess maybe, maybe we go back now, it's a quarter of a century ago, if you look at, we talked about the internet being, the democratization of brands where I could have, Brand Keys Cola and advertise on the same page as Coca-Cola did. And people say, well, there you go. Now you have you've got the same access that Coke has. Um, the problem is, and we learned, we went through that. We went, yeah. The awareness and click through and all of that wasn't really what was going to show a payoff in terms of return on investment of those things. And so I think, there's the obvious, which is if they're not aware of you, they're not going to ever consider you, and you're not going to have the opportunity to do this. But given the way that the media ecology has moved, I mean, in terms of where we are as consumers and brands, it's really hard not to be able to create some level of awareness within a category, within a consideration set.
Yeah, indeed. Uh, well, I think we answered. Oh, there's one last question here from Gasky, Professor John Gasky. He asked, "What exactly do you mean by recalibrate?" This was earlier in the
Ah,
presentation.
okay. Uh, what we go back and we look at the values of the psychological questionnaire that we use in order to be able to assess the brands. And there are sometimes some minor recalibrations that we have to make in terms of the psychological values and what they bring. But again, we if I may, one of our people came to me a month ago and said, we have a problem with one of the studies, and they were looking at something because they only had a 0.73 correlation between the metrics and the actual sales numbers that the client had provided. And I'm always, I always have the picture of the social scientists dancing naked and opening champagne when they get a 0.40 correlation. So, we just like to make sure that we're measuring how people are viewing the brand and how they see the brand meeting their expectations.
Okay, great. Well, I think we finished off all of our questions. So thank you so much for participating in our summit today.
Almost on time.
Oh, yes, we're very good.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're very
Appreciate it.
welcome. Thank you, everyone.